Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome
Oh,
to our Thanksgiving edition of Ghost Education 101. I kind of had to get a little festive there, and I put a little turkey at the bottom of our screen.
you see that? That's awesome.
How are you today, Tiffany?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I am excited about today's guest. He's a return guest, and I know you're excited to have some questions for him as well. So rather than delaying, because I know we only have him for an hour and a half, let's bring on Dacre Stoker. How are you doing today?
I'm
Welcome.
doing great. Thanks for having me on again. It's always great chatting with you guys, especially,
Yeah,
at the end of it's never not spooky season, but this is the highlight
right.
for all of us. And
Yes.
as we move from pumpkins into Christmas trees and the ghost stories surrounding Christmas, which
Yeah.
Exactly.
never stop,
Yeah.
but great to be here and to share some of our stories and my findings with you.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you. Real quick before we get started, can you just let our guests know who you are and the
A little,
famous relative that you
uh,
have?
yeah. Okay. So first of all, I'm Dacre Stoker. I am an international best-selling author of a couple of books, a prequel to Dracula called Dracula and a sequel to Dracula, Dracula Undead. And reason all that is so important to me is that I am the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula. Over the past 15 years, I've been digging into his life. I found his notes. I found the Dracula typescript, all kinds of cool things that I've discovered about my famous relative. And as you're going to hear, I love to chat about it. And some of these things are things that even the biographers don't know about, things that I've really dug into and find some new interesting facts about Bram, his research, his writing of the novel Dracula.
That is great. We are so excited to have you here. And one little side note before we start diving into those questions is I saw recently you have a wine.
You are good. So just short version, because this is only about a year and a half old, but
Okay.
we launched it in the US October 13th
Yep.
at Francis Ford Coppola's house in the French Quarter in New Orleans. Well,
Wow.
Stoker Wines is a project that two people that I got to know very well. One of them came on one of my tours to Romania. She used to work for Goldman Sachs. She had retired from there and loved traveling, loved wine. And on one of my tours, we did a vineyard tour, and she got into this very kind of quiet little industry, which is the Romanian wine industry that not many people know about because communism only fell in 1989 and a lot of the wines never made it out of the country. Now
Right.
they need help getting it out of the country. So long story short, her and another investor got a hold of me and said, look, let's buy an existing winery. Let's rebrand it as Stoker Wines. And we sort of joke and say, the last big export from Romania was Dracula in 1897. Let's have the next best export from the Stoker family out of Romania as Stoker Wines. So we are available in the US now, but it's only through direct sales, direct to
Okay.
customer. So it is in California at a company called In Good Taste. So you go to
Yes.
stokerwines.ingoodstates.com, ingoodtaste.com, and you can order all the wine you want. It's just not available yet in the States, except for Louisiana, where we had our launch. We actually had all the licenses. It's now available at my good friend Marita Crandall, who is a serious vampire aficionado. She owns Boutique de Vampire, Vampire Cafe, and she sells our wine
Wow.
in the restaurant. So yeah,
Awesome.
it's good stuff. It's not that we haven't bought grapes from all over the world and repackaged it. This is literally a Romanian vineyard. It's about an hour and 15 minutes outside of Bucharest in the area called Ceptura, which is one of the many wine growing areas, a
How
microclimate in the
exciting.
Carpathians. And
Yeah.
we have red wines, we have rosé. Now we do have to purchase grapes from the northern part of the country where the white grapes are produced, and we will have a white wine coming out next year that will be from somebody we have to buy from. But they like our reds so much that we trade them. We trade back and forth the grapes.
That's awesome. I think my husband is watching. So if you're listening, we need to get on that. We need to try some wine.
Yeah, it's I mean, it really is good wine. It's very
Yeah.
high level wine. Sort of like in the $20 to $30 bottle range. It's
Yeah.
not the table wine at $8 or $10, but it's not the 50. It's sort of
Yeah.
that middle of the road.
That's a good wine.
My favorite is actually the rosé, because I don't like a sweet rosé, but it's a very sort of subtle, dry rosé. and it's made with some of the Pinot Noir grapes. So it is almost like if you close your eyes and you like a light red, like a Pinot, it's a very light red. But again, not sweet, not bubbly.
Okay.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think we should get started with some
Yep.
questions here, Heather. What do you think?
Yep.
So I hear that recently you have come across some new information, because I know you've been really heavily digging into Bram Stoker and researching him and just kind of bringing everything into light over the past 15 or so years. But recently, I think you discovered some new information. Do you mind sharing some of that with us?
Tiffany, I love sharing this stuff. So sort of put things in perspective. I give these lectures all over the world called Bram Stoker's Life, His Research, His Writing of Dracula. And what I try to do is find out things in his life that he did or was exposed to that influenced his writing.
Right.
And that's not that uncommon. What people who are into Mary Shelley or Mark Twain or Edgar Allan Poe, we all like to find out what makes those people tick. And so therefore, why do they write the way they are? What are their major influences? In most cases, it's things that they lived in or lived around, the times they were in, and also it's situations, weird things that happened to them that influenced them, Ernest Hemingway and others. So I found all kinds of cool stuff about Bram Stoker. His childhood illness is one piece. And the fact that he had 3 brothers, my great-grandfather being one of them, Bram's youngest brother was a doctor, Dr. George Stoker, who invented ozone therapy. But his older brother, Thornley, had major influence on Bram. They were very close in age. Thornley was number 1, then he had a sister, Matilda, and then Thornley was number 3. But he also helped Bram with the surgical equipment used in Dracula, the transfusion equipment, the actual types of knives to be used when they had to cut off Lucy's head to do sort of the post-mortem, and the brain surgery on Renfield in chapter 21 that doesn't make many of the movies. So if you guys are listening and you haven't read the book, you won't know what I'm talking about. In chapter 21, Renfield gets beat up by the Count, who comes into his cell in the asylum as a mist, and he's upset with Renfield for spilling the beans about where the master is coming, where he is, and how he's getting around. So he slams Renfield around. Renfield bangs his head and has a brain bleed, and therefore he needs very quickly to have brain trephination surgery. And that is something that Thornley Stoker did 3 times. I read them in old treaties. Twice the patient survived, and once not so much. He died of infection. They didn't have antibiotics in that time.
Right.
So this was a diagram in Bram's notes, little holes and absolute description on what and how you do this type of surgery, even to the point where one of the surgeries had the patient very conscious, which was not unusual, and was requesting some water to drink. So up until this point, we all thought, well, that's Thornley's contribution to Dracula. He was a very famous guy. He became knighted, so he was Sir William Thornley Stoker for his contributions to medicine, and he was the head of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. But it gets deeper than that. What I've recently found, and this, guys, I've been at this 15 years, and you uncover stuff all the time, and it's sometimes because when you Google things, they're not digitized in certain databases, so you don't find out about it until some intern somewhere digitizes these newspaper articles, or in this case, these medical journals. Well, I found out that Thornley was an inspector of something called vivisection. Now, vivisection is kind of grotesque when we look at it now, but it was the way a lot of people understood about how the brain worked. The early medical professors would have a dog or a monkey or a rabbit chained to a, strapped down to a chair while everybody is watching, and they'd cut off the top of their skull and expose the brain. And then they'd poke and prod the brain to see what parts of the monkey or the animal was moving. So this is how medical students and doctors would understand how the brain worked. Now, that doesn't sound horrible, does it? Except for it was done an awful lot. And it was done to the point where there was serious concerns in the medical community that it was being overused, mostly for the sake of ratings, because, oh, isn't this cool? Let's go see Dr. Stoker poking and prodding on this monkey or this dog. And then what happens to the monkey or the dog?
Yeah.
Do they get, properly euthanized, or do they get put back into a cage in the back room of this operating area? And without antibiotics, would they slowly die of some horrible infection in a painful, inhumane way? So Thornley Stoker, who had done this vivisection and learned a lot about it, enough to do 3 brain trephination surgeries on people, he was also an animal lover, and he actually had dogs in his family all his life. And as did Bram. As I see, Tiffany, you've got a cat. Bram always had a cat. And there was always cats around the Lyceum Theater because Bram loved them, but also the cats kept the rats away. So the family loving animals was like, wait a sec, we're even though there's this juxtaposition between medical science and animals, what's more important? And it's like at a certain stage, it's like we got to watch out for the animals. So Thornley convinced the medical board to actually create this whole system. And I'm going to show you something here. So you get, and I've got one too. This is Simon, Tiffany. Simon just hopped up to see what was going on.
Yeah, Malachi's got his own little bed here.
Well, Simon's right next to me here. So this issue, while Bram was writing the novel Dracula between 1890 and 1897, became an issue which got picked up in the novel Dracula. And that was the evil scientists that were out there. And actually, Bram mentioned them in the story. Burden Sanderson and Ferrier is in, I can't remember if it's chapter 15 or 16 or 17, somewhere in there, where Renfield is being treated by Dr. Seward in the asylum. And Seward says, I would love to make medical advances and do experimental surgery on him to better understand how he works and what his ailment is, if only it was deemed necessary. There are those scientists, Burden, Sanderson, and Ferrier, evil scientists, and then he mentions Dracula being the evil scientist doing experiments on Renfield. So in the consciousness of the readers of the story, they would certainly pick up on this huge issue. And I've even seen newspaper, like cartoons, they did a lot in the Victorian era, and they had this room full of animals watching a human being having the surgery, in the open head, as a parody. So this was something that Bram touched on, depicting Count Dracula not only as a supernatural vampire creature that would capitalize on the vampire myth that people were very well aware of, but also as an evil scientist who was doing experiments on Renfield by making him eating the bugs, having him eat larger life forms, the little birds and so on, and also therefore controlling his brain so he could get access by being welcomed into the asylum. Remember, that's what the vampire had to do, is invite somebody in. Dracula got control over Renfield by doing these experiments and therefore having free reign to get in, not only to him, but to the other patients in the asylum and into Mina. So long story short, This was probably about 8 sentences in this huge novel, but it is a nod to a medical social situation that was going on that his readers would have very much understood. This Count Dracula is really evil. And then I'll finish with this. Van Helsing kind of left us hanging. He said about Count Dracula when he refers to Renfield, but that's not his most important and dangerous experiments. And there go on to say, and now we got to find the 50 boxes of dirt. So it's leaving us thinking, well, what else is he doing? He's collecting these human beings that he then converts to vampires. They've got to stay in their boxes of dirt, which is another thing that Bram Stoker invented. He did not find this folklore about vampires having to sleep in their native soil by Emily Gerard or any of other sources. That was something he made up. Okay. So I think he made this up and had this as the other experiment, that Dracula's converting for the first time out of his country new victims, new vampires, and yet they sleep in 3 different places, the houses that Dracula bought, in the 50 boxes of dirt. So, Tiffany, that's a fairly long-winded, but you get that's how I operate.
I love it. I love it. And while you were talking, I had the thought come through my head, because you just mentioned, Bram's readers, but I think you were referring to his readers back in the day. And now we have you, not only somebody who has, dived so deep into his life, but you are also, a distant family member. So you have kind of that connection. And now we have you to help us put everything together in modern day, because all of that kind of gets lost, over the years. Yep. And we read this story, and now I want to go back and read it, because I haven't read it in so many years. And I want to reread it with all of this new information that I now have. So it's really amazing that you've done everything that you still do, so that you can give, people now in this modern time that kind of really amazing insight, and kind of get into the head of this wonderful author and wonderful human being.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I should have said at the beginning for your listeners, he didn't write an autobiography. He didn't write anything about himself other than 2 sentences, in a book he wrote about Henry Irving, saying about his childhood being a sick child, and he didn't know what it's like to stand upright for 7 years, and so on. Everything else I've had to piece together by finding his journal, by finding the Dracula notes in Philadelphia in the Rosenbach Museum, finding the Dracula typescript, and finding different letters that I have either found online that are sitting in a museum, or I purchased them. And it's like a massive puzzle, like putting this together and then going, all right, what does that tell me? It's a lot of circumstantial evidence. It's the same like ghost hunting, though, isn't it? You find different different pieces of evidence, and the more of it you find, the more credible you are, the more backstory of these haunted houses, who lived here, what happened there. Oh, this goes bump in the night. This does this does. Okay, now we can, draw, some pretty good conclusions. I'm doing exactly the same by trying to find what make Bram tick. What were some things he was interested in? Who were the people in his circles? And what were the readers of the time, most sensitive to? Because Bram was a theater manager, right? Theater managers in those days, they actually tweaked, along with their actors and actresses, tweaked the plays that they were putting on to make them more relevant. Either make them scarier, make them less scarier, make them happy. It was escapism. And so they would tweak them. That's why he was so well suited to write not the first vampire novel in the world. It was actually the 4th, but it was the one that brought the Count into modern day, contemporary day, in a way that it seemed very realistic.
Yep. And you were mentioning that he had some friends, some people that were in his circle. And earlier, I heard a little story that maybe he might have received a letter and that you might have that letter.
Back in the day, we're talking 1890, 1897 is that 7-year period with Dracula. Obviously, he lived into his early 60s. They didn't have Google or email or anything else. They had letters. So Bram was known to write, 100 letters a day, not just social, but for the Lyceum Theater. So if any of your listeners want a interesting gig, go online and just Google Bram Stoker letters, and you'll see so many of these things pop up. And I've been lucky enough to find online, a letter from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the writer of Sherlock, who was a good friend of Bram's, congratulating him on Dracula and so on. There is letters to Prime Minister Gladstone when Bram sent him a copy of Dracula. But one of the coolest connections that I've been able to find is Mark Twain. So I'm going to start by telling you guys a sort of a funny story that's part of the Stoker family lore, and then I'm going to tell you more about the letter and letters. But so Bram, one of the houses he lived in was in the fashionable district of Chelsea in London. And he was making good money back in the day when he was the manager of the Lyceum Theater. So they had a housekeeper, and they had a nice 3-story house. I've actually seen the house. It's still there. It's got a little blue plaque. And then just a street over, there's another blue plaque for Mark Twain. So he was neighbors with Mark Twain. And what I'm about to tell you, I know is true. It's passed on by the family, but also it makes a lot of sense when all these letters I'm going to talk about come to light. Well, Bram was told by his wife, you got to get home by 4 o'clock today. This is because Bram would go on the ferry up the Thames River to Lyceum Theater in the morning, make sure everything was set for the day. He'd come back middle of the day for a late lunch, and then he'd go back to work, for curtain time. So he was normally home somewhere around 3 or 4 o'clock for tea and to see his wife and to change his clothes and then go back. This particular day, she had invited Mark Twain to come over for tea. And they were friends, and it was like very special to have him come over. So Florence told the housekeeper, look, we don't want anyone else to come in and bother us when Mr. Twain is here for having tea. Don't let anybody else come and bother us. It's important. Because there's always people coming to talk to Bram about, they wanted newspaper articles, they wanted interviews, whatever. And Bram, you better get home on time. So Bram is, he's rushing home to get home. He gets home, about 3:45. Tea time is high time for tea, 4 o'clock. He gets home, rushes upstairs, cleans himself up. And Florence is like, I told you to get home on time. I did. So 4 o'clock comes. Bram and Florence are sitting in the second floor where they receive. Nothing. 4:10, 4:15, 4:30. Nobody shows up. So Florence goes downstairs to the maid and says, well, what has happened? Has anyone come to the... She says, yes, a Mr. Clemens came to the door, but I shooed him away and told him not to be interrupted. So she obviously didn't know what his real name was. So that was an in-joke in the family. Apparently it really happened. So these guys were close. Bram actually helped Mark Twain publish a book. Around about the equator, he was his agent for him in London to get the book published. Bram actually included a quote all about spiritualism in Dracula. And it was this piece of the novel where Van Helsing is explaining to the scientist, Dr. Seward, which is totally modeled after Bram's eldest brother, another one of my great-granduncles, Thornley Stoker, the one that helped him with all the medical stuff and the vivisection guy. So Van Helsing is the one that understands law, medicine, and mysticism. And he's trying to explain to Seward without telling him without putting words in his mouth, what is happening to Lucy. They give transfusions of blood to this poor girl during the day. She's pale. She's dying of lack of blood. Obviously, we know what the little holes on her neck are, but Nobody else does at that stage in the novel. They don't have any idea what a vampire is. And science can't prove any of that. So Seward is totally dumbfounded. And they continue to put blood in during the morning. At nighttime, obviously, we know what's happening. Count Dracula comes, he gets inside, he tricks the maid to open the windows. She comes in, drains the blood. The next morning, Seward comes in, and he sees this pale lady after they've given all this blood, no blood in her. And there's no blood lying around on the floor, no big puddle of blood. And so he's going to Van Helsing, I just don't understand. Van Helsing says, I want you to believe. Believe what? He says, I once heard of an American. You must have faith in me. You must have faith, he said. What do you mean by faith? You got to believe. Believe in what? He says, I once heard of an American who so defined faith as believing in those things you know to be untrue. Believing in things you know to be untrue. In the scientific world at that time, as the scientific process is just beginning to pick up momentum, and just about 10 years beforehand, you have the origin of the species that is written, and people are beginning to realize that the creation theory is not as important as evolution theory, right? So that is, again, a major struggle going on. Mark Twain wrote in Roundabout the Equator, faith is knowing in things, is believing in things you know ain't so.
Yeah.
And that is almost word for word what Bram put into the story.
Yep.
Faith is believing in things you know ain't so. I once heard of an American who said faith is believing things you know to be untrue. And that is a huge issue in the paranormal world, in the medical world, in the vampire world, is having faith and understanding and believing in things you can't necessarily prove with today's science, but we still want to believe because a lot of these things make you believe it, or your understanding accepts these things in our present form of understanding. So I'm laying out, before I tell you about this letter, I'm laying out the relationship between these men. I believe, and we know that Mark Twain was a spiritualist, that he had a spiritual connection to his brother when he died in a steamboat, accident in the Mississippi. And I believe Bram Stoker was a believer, or at least an open-minded person in things of the mind, in mystical things. One of the quotes, there are mysteries in life which men may only guess at, which age by age we may solve only in part. That's Bram Stoker, again, channeling those words through Van Helsing when the scientist in the room can't grasp the supernatural. So now I get to the real crux of the issue. So Twain thought Henry Irving was incredible. Henry Irving was the guy that owned the Lyceum Theater. He was the most famous actor of the day. Bram Stoker was his manager, was his personal assistant, was his best friend. And Twain brought a business proposal to Bram Stoker and Henry Irving. And it was one of these famous things that Twain thought of that was just, he got so entangled up in something called the Page Compositor. It was by a guy whose last name was Page, and it was a small printing press. And it was going to revolutionize how small printing was being done. Not, the huge big factories that have to print books. This was a small version, very complicated. One of them actually sits in the Mark Twain house in Hartford, Connecticut. The problem is, it was so complicated. It could have been wonderful if it was only, maybe made by a German guy, who could make all the pieces work, but it didn't work. And so those people like Bram Stoker and Henry Irving and many others who invested $50 to $100 of those days' money, which is a lot like in today's money, 20, 30, 40, 50 grand, that's significant. And what is more significant is the letter that I was able to purchase at auction for much more money than my wife wanted me to spend. But it was really important because it was Mark Twain to Bram saying, I'm really sorry this thing hasn't worked, but I'm
Mhm.
going to pay you back. And here is your investment of like
Oh,
$50. So
wow.
now what's even more interesting is I live in this town in South Carolina, and I met a lady who is a historian. Art history actually was her big thing. Her great grandfather turned out to be one of the attorneys that helped Mark Twain approach people in the Standard Oil Company to pay back all these people. So that shows the character of Mark Twain. Not always a great writer and a comedian and a speaker, but in those days, when an investment goes belly up, he thought it was very important to go find people that had the resources in America to pay back those guys
Mhm.
that lost their money in their investment.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you lose money on a stock. Hey, too bad, buddy.
Yep.
Yep.
But not, that shows character. And having a letter like that, I'd kind of heard this was happening, and I've seen the page compositor, and I've seen other correspondence between Mark Twain and Bram, but to own this and have it in my possession, and also being able to loan it to museums or libraries when the life of Bram Stoker is depicted, it's real proof, and it's not just hearsay. I can talk about it like I am now, but it's like, what's better than when you actually have that thing to put out there, behind glass, and you plug all the pieces together, and it shows the relationship between these guys. It also says, I don't have the money now, but I'm going to get it to pay back Irving, which he did.
Hmm.
So that is kind of cool, and that's the type of thing I always look for. I found another one, which was really, it actually made me, and I couldn't buy this one because it was already owned by the British Archives. No, I'm sorry, it was owned by the Literary Royal Literary Fund, which is a fund in England that provides grants to authors that are needing money.
Oh, wow.
And Bram Stoker, as successful as he was while he was running the Lyceum for 27 years, but before Dracula started making a lot of money as a novel, because he died in 1912, it didn't hit the stage till 1924. That's when the bucks started rolling in for book royalties. So his widow was doing okay, but nothing like when the dramatic rights were sold and then sold to Universal Studios in 31 for the Bela Lugosi film.
Mhm.
But what the Royal Literary Fund letter, they contacted me and said, you might be interested in this letter. And it was a letter that Bram wrote to them in 1910, just 2 years before he died, requesting financial assistance because he was stricken by a stroke, paralyzed in one hand, and he was trying to finish the last book he was working on, which was The Lair of the White Worm, and he needed help.
Mhm.
And to see a guy that I've studied and researched and seen his journal and everything else, but obviously at the end of his life, having to ask for financial assistance was not easy, but
Yeah.
he did so with great elegance, no humor, but it was just, here's my situation. But he then goes and says and verifies when he has to give background about himself to this committee. He says, this is what I have done. I won a Royal Humane Society medal for bravery. He jumped in the Thames River once to save a guy that had tried to commit suicide by jumping
Wow.
off of the same ferry Bram was on going to work. He threw off his coat, threw off his boots, jumped in the river, got the guy, swam through the horrible, disgustingly gross water in the Thames and the swirling currents, and got him out, ran him home with him on his back, where my great grandfather, who was a doctor, was there. They tried to do CPR, but they couldn't revive him. But
Oh.
Bram was proud of the fact that he got a bronze medal from the Royal Humane Society for attempted, saving of somebody. So
Mhm.
for bravery, and that was mentioned. So that was another thing besides a newspaper article I saw that verified things that Bram did in his life, but also showed a very kind of soft side of a man that was, big 6'2", big athletic guy, theater manager, but also writer of romance and mystery and supernatural, that kind of stuff. So again, long-winded answer, Heather, to letters, but that plays a big role in how I can understand a man, and I don't want to, go off on a tangent, but, certain politicians, when they do things and we get all their emails, we know where they're at because of all the email back and forth.
Right.
You can read the story of Bram Stoker if you can get his letters. And one of the things I think I'm going to work on before I get out of this business is, something like letters to and from Bram Stoker, just publish these things and give a short update, maybe a little shorter than I have here, about the circumstances around those letters. Because
Yeah.
it's proof, right?
I would love to have
Yeah.
a book like that. That
Right.
is, it's so like, and I think I'm just kind of reiterating what maybe a little bit what I said earlier, but it's just so interesting to have somebody like you to just allow us into, and you never met him, but it almost feels like, you knew him so intimately and so personally. And just to have that insight into a person and what you were saying, he went, to these people for help because it was so important for him to be able to finish his stories. What about his writing or his stories do you feel he was trying to convey to people? Because I know when I write, there's always something kind of underlying that I'm trying to bring through, and I hope that my readers pick it up. Whether it be something that they interpret it in a way that is meaningful for them, or it's in whatever I was trying to hopefully, be able to get across. It doesn't matter to me as long as they take something meaningful away. But do you think there was something that Bram was trying to convey to his readers in all of his work, not just with Dracula, but in everything that he did? And why that was so important for him? Because most people, if they go through a stroke, they can't hold a pen, they can't, they can't write. A lot of people would say, okay, I'm just going to live out my life and enjoy it the best I can. But he didn't. He was like, I have something to say and I'm going to ask for help because I have to finish this. What do you think he was trying to get across to people?
So, he was Irishman, born
Yeah.
and raised in Dublin, traveled around Ireland as a clerk in the Petty Sessions legal department, was kind of stuck in an early life in the legal business, but he was also in the theatrical business. He loved writing, he loved expressing himself, and a lot of the Irish just love to tell a story. But most of the stuff that he wrote was all about sort of investigating or looking at real life situations in a way that the common man may not quite notice that things are going on or things could happen. So it's like another way of looking at things. And in a way, I would say of the 12 novels and 30 some odd short stories, and I will just break for a second and tell you this: bramstoker.org is a free website run by a professor where all of Bram Stoker's stories are available for free. So what we are talking about, the three of us, if you want to go follow up, you can read all of his short stories, all of his novels totally for free. I'm not trying to sell you a book here, right? So his other than Dracula novels, I think the central themes and things like The Mystery of the Sea, Lair of the White Worm, Jewel of Seven Stars, Lady of the Shroud, they all have a sort of scientific and supernatural ghostly theme. And they're all very subtle. It's not like he comes out and has a bunch of ghosts running around. It's like, oh, this could be the spirit of somebody, or what might this be, and how does this interact on a level, with a human being? One of the favorites that illustrates this point, Tiffany, is a real sleeper, Lady of the Shroud, which I think was absolutely brilliant. It was written after Dracula, and being surrounded in the family by scientists. Again, remember I said 3 doctors.
Mm-hmm.
He sets the story after all of his research that he did in Romania. The story is not set in Romania or Transylvania or Wallachia, but he doesn't tell the name of the country, but it's nearby. He probably looked at, and he had maps, all right, all in the London Library books that he had listed in the back of his Dracula notes, 26 books. He did a ton of research and he had maps. It was probably somewhere a little bit north of Romania, where now either Slovenia or Slovakia is. But he called it the land of the Blue Mountains. So it could be still the Carpathians, who knows? But he set up a story where this small country, very proud country, with sort of population of sort of, different types of gypsies and so on, which, sounds a lot like Transylvania, were dominated by a country around it, sort of like Romania was with the Ottoman Empire. Bulgaria was Ottoman Empire at the time, who wanted to come in and gobble up this country. And by doing so, the leader of that country was going to marry the beautiful daughter of the small little country. That's kind of typical. How did Bram deal with that? He invented a way, and I've seen the books that he read about human beings being mistakenly diagnosed as being dead in either cataleptic state, epileptic state, some kind of paralysis. Actually, I say that just, 2 days ago, this happened in Thailand. I don't know if you guys saw that on the news, that a lady was deemed to have died. Her son drove her in this coffin all the way to a mortuary to be cremated, and she freaking woke up in the back. And this was like all over the news yesterday and today. But this is what Bram had found a couple of cases of, and books written about it. And so he used that in this story, that this young lady was going to fake that she was dead and be put in a glass coffin, laid out in this church, so that this leader of the other country couldn't marry her. And so she had to fake, and they had given her a pill to slow down her heartbeat. This is like still in the late 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
And had a little air tube. And at night, she would, out the bottom of this glass coffin, sneak out with the shroud on and sort of wander around. And this character that Bram placed in this country, because he had inherited money and had to live in this country for a year, he basically saw her in this sort of misty area, this lady of the shroud, and thought, oh my God, who is she? Is she a ghost? Is she a vampire? What is she? And she had this other person in the castle who had second sight, who would say, oh, I see you with great things with this lady. You are going to have a long life. So what he was doing here was using modern science and the potential for somebody faking death, but turning it into some mystical, ghostly apparition that obviously became the ghost story, until 3/4 of the way through the novel, he finds out she's really human and she spills the beans, and now the other country invades, and all the beans are out. So back to what I think Bram's saying is, I think Bram is saying not everything in life is as we see it. If you look a little deeper, you could find some really cool stuff. And folks, It's exactly the same. And that's why I sort of say Bram Stoker was one of the early Victorian paranormal investigators. He was interested in spiritualism. He had a very good friend in Pamela Coleman Smith, who was the first artist to depict the Smith-Waite tarot cards, friends with Conan Doyle and Twain, spiritualists. So I don't think he could necessarily talk openly about this because why? He was
Right.
a very conservative theater manager. But I found this article, and Heather, tell me if I already talked about this in your other show, that Bram Stoker in Dundee, Scotland, this newspaper came out in 1931 that I found in an online archive, was observed by a journalist talking about his experiences with second sight.
No.
Okay, I'll continue.
Yeah, you didn't talk about that one yet.
I'll continue because in one of my, other than Dracula, my next favorite novel is Mystery of the Sea. And the first chapter of Mystery of the Sea came out early as a standalone short story, The Seer. The Seer is about a lady in Cruden Bay, Scotland, Gormala, who has second sight, much like people in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, northern Scotland. Well, folks, Bram Stoker spent 11 summer holidays in Cruden Bay, Scotland, and they had the reputation of this old ladies who used to have, you know, the premonitions and ability to see things. So he writes the story about it. And then I also found, because a good friend of mine who's a professor, Dr. John Edgar Browning, found that Bram did one book review once in his life. And it was a review of a book by a guy called McCrae, who writes about second sight in the Highlands and Islands of northern Scotland. And the review was for a newspaper in New Zealand, if you can believe it.
Wow.
But he wrote that all the stuff McCrae was talking about was very legit. He was not putting it down back in the late 1800s that, oh, here's a crackpot talking about second sight. It's no, much of this stuff is provable. It is verifiable. And so back to Dundee, this guy, Norval Scrimmanger, who is a journalist who understood and believed in this stuff himself, said, I have waited till 1931 to write about this. Remember, guys, Bram died in 1912. Scrimmanger said he came to Dundee because Irving and Stoker or Irving was performing nearby in the theater. Stoker was his manager. He was there all the time. There was a reception for Irving, but I found Mr. Stoker much more interesting as he sat by the fireplace with his cup of port and a cigar and was regaling us with two specific situations in Scotland where he observed second sight. And he was saying it as if he totally believed it. And one of them was he went to visit a friend in Edinburgh when he was on this trip. She was a middle-aged lady with a young child in arms, maybe a year and a half, 2 years old, had a 3-year-old daughter who had come in the room and she was crying and crying and crying. And the mother was like, don't bother us. We've got Mr. Stoker visiting. And no. You don't understand it. And I think baby James, he won't play anymore. He's going to die. The kid's very healthy. What are you talking about? No, he's going to die. He won't play. Next day, the little baby unexpectedly died just like that. So it's like, okay, that could be a lot of things, right? The mother couldn't have diagnosed everything, but most mothers know what the heck's going on with the kid. So isolated case, who knows? But there's a situation where this little child just had some sort of premonition. But then the next one was more real. Bram Stoker was a very good friend with the Earl of Errol. This was the guy that owned Slains Castle, that was the big castle that owned all the land around Cruden Bay. And back in those days, what they did was they owned the land. All the people would work for the earl. They would give rent to the earl. They'd give crops to the earl. The earl will sell it all around the country. In some cases, they would ship the grain, good Scottish grain, all around the world. So Bram, when he would come to the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel or one of the other houses that he rented in the 11 summers, he was always get an invite to go see the earl. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, the layout for Slane's Castle is exactly the same as the internal layout of Bram's fictional castle Dracula.
Oh, wow.
There's no question, right? If go Google it at some point, you'll see a very strange octagonal room in the very middle. The thing's a ruin now, so you can see drone footage of it. It wasn't a ruin when Bram was there, but it's exactly the same as Harker is described entering into this castle. And he walks through a door, goes through another door, into a corridor, into an octagonal room, lit by a single lamp with no windows to the outside, blah, blah, blah. It's exactly it. But the earl would go on pheasant shoots and invite, guests of the Kilmarnock Arms, important people to come with them. And when you go on a pheasant shoot, you're given a guide called a ghillie. And Bram went with this ghillie who would load the gun for you and then hand you the gun. The bird would flush from the ground and you'd take a shot at the bird. And if you missed, he'd hand you another gun that was shot ready to go. So, back in the days, you didn't even have to load your own gun. The servant would give it to you. And you have a relationship with this guy because you're hanging around him for about 5 hours that day. And Bram asked, "And how's the earl doing?" And the ghillie said, "Oh, not so well. The veil is getting high." Now, you guys should know what that means. The veil is getting high. He's near death.
Mhm.
And Bram was like, "What, are you kidding me? He sounds perfectly healthy." And so they have the shoot, shake hands, tip the guy, go home. And he's just wondering. He tells Florence, "Geez, I had the weirdest thing. This ghillie, who I respect greatly, thinks that the earl's going to die." The holiday plays out. Bram goes back to London. He's just wondering about his friend. Nothing happens. He comes back the next summer. He's invited out again to go pheasant shooting. And he says, "I'd like to have the same ghillie," because he wants to go to him and say, "Hey, you were wrong, man. The guy's totally fine." And he goes, "Oh, no, Mr. Stoker, the veil is even higher now." And it's like, does he know something about, an undiagnosed situation, or is he being diagnosed with cancer and it's getting worse? Nothing like that. And so he said, "Well, you're wrong again." 2 days later, the earl dies of a brain hemorrhage. Just boom, gone. So Stoker was saying that at this gathering in the home in Dundee, and Norval Scrimmauncher was sort of putting those together as, you may not believe in all these things, but enough of this circumstantial evidence, especially by a man as reputable as Bram Stoker, the manager of Sir Henry Irving, the first actor ever knighted, is not full of BS. And yet he did wait 31 years to write this because he didn't necessarily want to paint Bram as maybe a whack job, right?
Yeah.
But he did go on to say, you may not believe in this, but I certainly do. And he talked about, how strange things happen from one country to another just purely by chance. Or is it all by chance? Is there some, spirits that make connections that may not be a ghostly apparition that we see or can pick up on a little machine, but still these things happen and we can't always explain them. And just because our minds are not that developed, maybe these things happen. So
it's exactly what we say every day today.
Well, don't we? Yeah, it's
These
true.
days.
Yeah.
Every lecture, everything. That's exactly how we explain it to people.
Yep. Yeah.
Well,
And
I think Brian was one of those guys. He would have loved to listen to you guys.
Yep. And now that we're on the topic of ghosts, you had briefly mentioned before we went live that you kind of have your own ghost theory.
Yeah. I mean, it stems from this, that what is it No, I'll start another way. I believe it's something like this. We have loved ones, we have friends, we have people that made impressions upon you in your life. I've been at this searching through Bram's notes, trying to understand him. And I honestly feel at certain times when I'm in, and it could be sitting in front of a computer like I am right now with you guys, or sitting in the basement at Marcia's library, a very cool library that's supposedly haunted in Dublin, Ireland, or Trinity College Library or somewhere, or opening up a book that I purchased at auction that I know that Bram inscribed himself with his own hand. And I open it up and I see that he left a leaf inside that was pressed and has been sitting in this thing for 100 years. That I feel some kind of a presence. I feel that maybe you get a thought in your mind that changes direction of where I'm going. Like, I'm working today to write something, for a film, or a guy who's writing a dissertation wants some advice about, what do you think about my theory on Bram? And I'll sit there and I'll get this idea. And it's hard to know where it came from. And I attribute that to the possibility of some sort of spiritual intervention. Yes, it could be I'm sitting there with 15 books and I'm studying them like crazy, or I just Googled. But if I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking and I'm visualizing, as I do in sport, I did a lot of visualization training and just sort of sitting there and thinking and getting prepared for something. Well, I do the same thing in writing. And I sort of think of either Bram or my dad, who was a lot like Bram. And it's really kind of strange when I look at tendencies that I do. And my dad died when I was only 24. I'm 67 now, and I still do things that the way my dad did things. My sister would tell me, "Oh my God, Dad used to do it that way." So did I pick it up from him? Was I around him that much? I was at boarding school. I was at college. I was training for the Olympics. I wasn't around home much, but it's like, where does that come from? Is it nurture? Is it nature? Or is it potentially some spiritual intervention that's just tapping you on the shoulder and go, "Hey man, go this way." Or think about this. Or I want you to tell the world a little more about me. And here's where you're going to find more information. Go to this book, or look deeper into this.
Yeah.
So Heather, I can tell you that I haven't seen things that go bump in the night or hear creaking, but I get these random thoughts. I get feelings. Sometimes it is a wonderful feeling. I'm driving in the car and a song comes on and it's like, holy crap, where did that, yes, it's random. I'm listening to Sirius and it's the 70s or 80s, but it brings back these thoughts that then develop into ideas that may, who knows where they came from.
Yep.
So I attribute those experiences to the possibility that there is something more out there that is left behind, thoughts, memories, tapping on the shoulder of those people that I want to connect with, and yet don't do it super actively, but do it passively. And that is a connection to me as real as it gets.
Yeah, it's almost like nothing is an accident. Because for
Yeah.
me, when I was doing some writing and I was finishing up and doing some editing on one of my books, and I decided to take a break, and I was just flipping through the TV, came across a documentary, and that immediately took my brain in another direction for a whole nother book. And then I sat in front of the computer and I knocked out 3 chapters for that book.
That's awesome.
And
I love
so
when
it's
that
like-
happens.
Yeah.
And I never would have thought of this. And it's like, if
Yeah.
that documentary didn't come up on the TV at that moment.
That's right. And you can knock yourself out all day long, say, how did that happen? Why that happened?
Yeah.
Instead of, hey, just go with it.
Yeah.
It's just that's it. Unexplained, go with it, because it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I always say there's no accidents in life.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. I mean, yeah, somebody rear ends you. You're like, what did you do wrong? Did you deserve it? Or should you
Or
have
was it to prevent something?
is something else up front? Yeah,
Yeah, I come
exactly.
across that all the time. Like just the other day, I was driving with my son, and we came to a stoplight, and just past the stoplight, there was a horrible accident that involved like 6 cars.
Ooh,
And had my son not forgotten to go upstairs and get his socks, and had it not
you could have
taken
been
us
farther down the road and in that accident.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So like that was a moment of me driving with him in the back, and I'm just like this with the steering wheel. Then I'm like, okay, I got to concentrate on this, on this detour now, because that was rough to have that thought go through my head. Like, had he not forgotten to get his socks, we could have been sitting in that pile right there.
Yeah. Wow.
So there are no accidents in life, and I was very, very grateful at that moment, to
And the more
not be in that.
open-minded we are as you go through life,
Mhm.
you if you keep the possibilities out there for these things, rather than just say, "Oh, it's got to be this."
Yeah.
Being skeptical about things is good,
Mhm.
because it's like, "Oh, let's question everything, but let's
Mhm.
also be open-minded so that we
Yes.
allow the possibilities of more than our current consciousness will allow us to comprehend." If you open up to that,
Yeah.
you might be pleasantly surprised, and it
Yeah.
also might give you more fullness in life, right?
Mhm.
Well, not only that, but I think that's the only way we've actually, evolved and gotten as far as we've gotten in humanity. Like, had we not been able to, stay open minded, say, yeah, okay, maybe we can fly, or yeah, maybe everybody can have a computer in their homes, we wouldn't be as advanced as we are. So I think we're getting to that point again. We kind of ebb and flow as a society, and we were in kind of that stuck stage for quite a long time. And I think now we're starting to get back into that kind of mindset as a society. And me and Heather have had this conversation quite a few times. We're starting to see, you know, die-hard scientists come
Mhm.
out now and say, let's take a deeper look at this whole consciousness thing.
Yep.
Let's take a deeper look at NDEs, near death experiences. Let's not, label noetic science as woo. Maybe there is something actually there,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're starting to see that again. And it's actually very refreshing because you don't start studying stuff just to start studying stuff.
Mhm.
We study this because we know there's something there. We've experienced something, and we want to know what it is. And that's the only thing that has gotten humanity to where we are today, because we said, we experienced something. I wonder what could happen. I wonder what this is. And we keep after it. We didn't just give up and say, oh, okay, well, this person or these people say it's one thing, so I'm just going to
Yeah.
go with it. That's not
Can,
how society
can you
grows.
imagine, I mentioned earlier origin of the species. Could you imagine
Yeah,
Charles Darwin, heading off to the Galapagos, and I'm not well, read enough to know what else he
right.
did or what he was doing before that mission, but that was huge. And apparently he was all set to publish his readings in the early 30s, 1830s, but he knew it was too controversial and he wouldn't be
Mm,
accepted. And I think what you're talking about, Tiffany, is things that have happened in history, a lot of things in between there, by going, oop, the time is not right. Either there's too much power in the
yeah.
church, too
Mhm.
much power in one side of government or industry, they're not going to listen. And I think that's what was happening with Darwin, to hold off until 1859 when he could actually publish The Origin of the Species. That sort of
Right.
flipped everything.
Mhm.
But can you imagine how earth-shattering that was to people at that time, to realize it wasn't all God's will and God's way to sort of, you know,
Yeah.
deem something, this is Adam and Eve and this is how it happened,
Mhm.
versus, oh, we evolved from monkeys? Wait a sec, I don't want to believe that. And look, there's still a lot of people that
Yeah.
are oscillating between a little bit of this, a little bit of that, because it makes me feel better. But again, it's sort of, let's be open-minded and let's look for, some of the evidence. Why was one line of thought gather so much momentum, and how did we start believing in the other one?
Mhm.
And
Right.
I'll tell you this part, that again, when Bram was writing Dracula between 1890 and 1897, there was more scientific advances going on in the world than there has been ever since. That this was this massive industrial revolution going on in the most sophisticated country of the world at the time, which was England. And with that brought that freedom to go beyond and think beyond the fist of the church being the gatekeepers for life and death. And it was, science deserves a seat at the table. And
Mhm.
what are they telling us? That there's a process that allows you to learn certain things, but you need certain proof. And if you look at this novel, Dracula, this is part of the whole theme of it. And that is, the scientists in the room or in the world were represented by Seward, who needed proof, but also the delicate topic of mental health. We didn't talk about that yet in the show, and I've got some time left here.
Yeah.
That, there has never been a time in our society where there hasn't been people with mental health problems. We just haven't been dealing with them,
Right.
in a humane and scientific and ethical way. My God, back in the Victorian era, these poor guys were just thrown into jail
Yeah.
and chained up because nobody could understand
Yeah.
what was going on, and they were a threat because their behavior was so strange. That the thinking of the medical community at the time, in some places, they thought they were taken over by demonic possession, and therefore they
Mhm.
got to be chained up. There's a perfect example of what you two are talking about. If you don't open up your mind, you're not going to figure out what the heck we have to do with them. And
Exactly.
so this Asylum Act was just coming into place while Bram was writing the novel. His mother had delivered papers to this all-male statistical and social inquiry society about how to judge if somebody was criminally insane, how to better educate people who are deaf and mute, and also better work conditions for women. So it wasn't just mental health issues she was dealing with, but that was a big cause within the Stoker household. And the Thornley Stoker, who I talked about at the top of the show, who was doing the brain trephination and the vivisection, was also doing therapy and dealing with mental health patients. So this was something very close to home to the Stokers. And that's why I'm convinced Bram had Renfield in the story, to show, hey, wait a sec, we need to treat these people better. We need to treat them ethically. And if you look closely, and Tiffany, when you go back and read Dracula again, look closely at how Renfield is depicted.
Okay.
He is depicted as a victim of Dracula doing these evil scientific things on him, but also the band of heroes led by Van Helsing and Seward and Godalming and the others treat him with great empathy.
Mhm.
And that's one reason why they did the brain surgery on the guy. They could have just discarded him because he was, he was a mental health whack job. We don't need him. But no, we do. And Mina showed great pity towards him. He actually showed not inappropriate affection, but he really thought Mina was wonderful and wanted to protect her from the master is coming, Count Dracula.
Mhm.
So this was a time when, even though people didn't understand the thinking and the process of what was going on with mental health people, Stoker needed to include that as one of his subplots in the story, as a general statement that we got a lot to learn about people. We just need to be more open-minded.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. What other Dracula questions do you have for me? We're getting heavy. We don't need to get too heavy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You want a Dracula question? Let's see
Dracula or any of my books or any of my tours. What else? We got about
Let's
20 minutes left. What do you want to talk about?
let's talk about your tours. If somebody, talk about that and talk about how people can go and learn about those and any lectures that you might have coming up.
Okay. So I work for two different companies. I'm called a host with Experience / Transylvania tour company. We're actually doing one and it's about to become public. They got a website, Experience-Transylvania. June the 1st, this coming year, we're gonna go to Romania. We go to places in Romania associated with Vlad Dracula the Impaler, so the real guy, and also Count Dracula, the fictional guy. And at the same time, we have, opportunities to eat great food. We actually do a cooking class. We go to wineries. We go to Stoker Wine in Cheptura. We do wine tasting and see how all the Stoker wines, the wine that tells the story, is all blended into, the Dracula narrative. We go to Vlad Dracula castles that he ruled at. We go to places that he impaled people. I also work with a company called Mysterious Adventure Tours. These are the ones that I went with this last Halloween. They've got a website, Mysterious Adventure Tours. We did a very cool thing this past Halloween. We actually rented the whole Bran Castle, known as Dracula's Castle. Now, I got to put that in perspective because about 20 minutes ago, I mentioned Slane's Castle in Cruden Bay, Scotland. The interior of that, Bram Stoker used for his fictional castle.
Okay.
But this castle, called Bran Castle, was depicted in two of the books that Bram listed in his resources for his notes for Dracula. The only two books that had any sketches of any castles in it, and both these sketches were the exterior of Bran Castle. So when he described the exterior, he was looking at those pictures. He never went there. I did 15 times now, but he merged these castles together. So we had one heck of a big Halloween party, all dressed up in this castle, and that's what we'll be doing next Halloween. So if you guys want to go back to Transylvania and check out all these cool sites and have a really interesting Halloween party in Bran Castle, Mysterious Adventure Tours. If you want to go in June, Experience-Transylvania. And it's a lot of fun. Some of the trips are only 7 days, some are 12 days. Some of them are only 14 people, some of them are up to 30 people, but we see all kinds of cool castles. And also we, look into what I think is really cool, that both of you guys may get into, is what were the original superstitions and folklore that caught Bram Stoker's attention for him to set the story there.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions.
And I'm sure the answer is this. He found a young lady called Emily Gerard, who was a Scottish writer that moved to Vienna with her family. While she was there, she met a guy in the Austrian-Hungarian cavalry and married him, moved to a very cool town called Sibiu in northern Transylvania. And it was there that she continued her passion of writing about local superstitions. She did it when she was back in Scotland, and she moved to northern Romania. And she was the one that, while she was this groundbreaking maverick of a young lady with her servant and her dog out in the countryside, talking to peasants, talking to priests, talking to farmers, all about what superstitions existed in their culture. And she's the one that literally wrote something like this: vampire or Nosferatu.
Right.
Spirits of the dead, of the evil, restless spirits that come back to take life from the living. And the only way to kill them is to wooden stake through the heart, cut off the head, burn ashes at crossroads. She delivered all that to my great granduncle on a platter. It was in an article in a magazine called 19th Century. She then went on to write a 2-volume book because she got so excited about this wonderful country she was living in, even back in 1885 when she wrote it, just 5 years before Bram started researching Dracula. This 2-volume book called Land Beyond the Forest. Sure enough, it was one of the books in the London Library that Bram listed in the back of his notes of all his resources and took word for word quotes from those books in his notes.
Wow.
So that is, and I'm proud to say, and give credit to the people that Bram Stoker read up on. Charles Bonner, Andrew Cross, Elizabeth Mattuccelli, another brave female that traveled all over into the deepest, darkest bowels of the Carpathian Mountains in Hungary and so on, long before it was fashionable to do so and risky, but they came back and wrote books about it, which then gave Bram Stoker all the reason in the world to depict the country, the geography, the culture, the history, the dress, the types of gypsies, all the stuff that he needed to place his novel in Transylvania and incidentally move move Prince Dracula from Wallachia to Transylvania and change him from a prince to a count, just to take a little artistic license, because of Emily Gerard and all the superstitions.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we investigate all that stuff and we go to those towns, and we actually have a friend of mine that is a tour guide that reenacts Emily Gerard and tells the stories, and just cool stuff around the dinner table, around a campfire, that sort of thing.
Yeah. That's
Cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
I have another question, if I may.
Yes.
If you could sit down with Bram, what would you ask him?
I'm still perplexed on what was that childhood illness that he had.
Yeah.
There has been nothing written. I have now my theory, but there's not a whole lot of circumstantial evidence. But it would be like, Bram, you've written this one thing that you said for the first 7 years of your life, you were confined to home and never knew what it was like to stand upright. The experiences that you had, he said, and the thoughtfulness were fruitful according to their kind in later years.
Mm.
I'm thinking, again, the experiences that I had were fruitful according to their kind in later years. I think he had a lot of time to think. Obviously, he must have been tutored, stories read to him. But what was it really like? 7 freaking years to be probably bloodlet,
Yeah.
probably very weak. I think it was probably respiratory allergies, very serious respiratory allergies and asthma.
Mhm.
And the reason I think that, but I'd like it verified by Uncle Bram, was I looked into the bedding that they slept in, linen, sort of hay or feathers, pillow, feathers, linen, Clontarf on Dublin Bay, very musty and mildewy.
Yeah.
And the fact that there is still a lot of asthma and allergies within the Stoker bloodlines. I mean, we all have it. My son had it, nephews. I mean, a lot of it. So yes, people grow out of it. There was no inhalers. There was no medicine. Bram, at the age of 7, did something. They moved inland a couple of miles away. Maybe it was not as musty and mildewy. Maybe the place was cleaner. I don't know. But he started walking. He got to be so good 7 years later when he went into Trinity College, having been tutored past his exams, that he became a champion race walker and rower,
Wow.
rugby player, all-around athletics champion. So whatever ailed him, he overcame it.
Yeah.
Was it bloodletting? Was it some miracle? Or as J.D. Barker and I did in Dracula, we did it fictionally. We had a little vampiric blood intervention. That's purely fictional. But it's like that really perplexes me. And so if I had a chance it would be along the lines of, what was your childhood like? How did you recover from it? I also think, Tiffany, that he was a conflicted young man, because
Oh.
I understand, having been a school teacher of elementary and middle and high school kids, that you've got people wired different ways, and some very creative brains and some very detail oriented brains. And sometimes, there are rare occasions when each of them are sort of displayed 50-50. I think Bram was someone like that, that
Mhm.
I've seen his writing in his journal. I've seen the artwork that he won prizes for as a kid. But I've also realized that he had to go and work in Dublin Castle as a clerk in the Petty Sessions legal department, and then became so good at that minutia that he got promoted to be the inspector of all the clerks all over Ireland. So what
Wow.
did he do? Like his character, Jonathan Harker, on the train, on carriages, going to all the different counties in Ireland to do what? To make sure that all the laws were being set
Mhm.
forth fairly and equally and according to the rule book. Well, there was no law book. So he actually came back to his boss in Dublin and said, "It's all messed up. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to write a manual."
Oh, wow.
So he actually published the first legal manual in Ireland for the clerks of petty sessions, and it was still in use up until the 1960s. And
Wow.
it is
That's amazing.
unbelievably dry and minutia, but it's all about little things, like licenses for animals and all this, like really boring stuff. But it was so Bram-esque that it made total sense to me to see that side of his brain engaged when he wrote all the details in Dracula. Harker going to Transylvania to do what? To consummate the real estate transactions for the Count, how you get all these boxes of dirt to go onto a boat, to be landed, to go onto a train, to move across the country by train schedules, all these things. So sitting down with a man that is like 50-50 creative and detail legal oriented, I'd like to see how that all sort of comes out in pure conversation and reminiscing about his life and his family and how he was accepted amongst a family of scientists when he was the one who was the only guy that went into the arts, other than his sisters, which became very well-known artists. But he was the male
Yeah.
as a theater manager. How did that go down?
Yep.
Awesome.
Well, we only have 5 more minutes with you. Do you have anything that we missed or anything that you want to talk about?
Okay. What do I want to talk about? The tours, talk about the ball. I probably a little plug. I want to tell you guys about this. I did a Dracula, an annotated Dracula book that came out in when did it come out? Gosh darn it. For the 125th anniversary of Dracula. So it came out just a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And it is with Robert Basang. It's annotated, but it also contains the bits and pieces of the novel that were edited out during the editing phase. So Paul
Wow.
Allen of Microsoft fame, he's now passed, but when he was alive, J.D. Barker and I got to go analyze the Dracula typescript in Seattle, Washington. We weren't allowed to take photographs, but I wrote notes. And I was particularly interested with everything that was crossed out. So there was about 500 pages typed, but many crossouts.
Oh.
And it started on page 102. So, and that was penciled 102. So it tells me that there was 101 pages that we never saw that was gone from this.
Wow.
And a couple of biographers, Leslie Klinger being one of them, who'd also had a chance to analyze these, said, what is all this about? Where is the first 101 pages? In addition, there was a page very near the end, right after the band of heroes catches up to the gypsies who are pulling the cart with the box on it, with Count Dracula in it, just before they get back to the castle. They have a fight. Quincy Morris stabs his Bowie knife into the heart of the Count, and Harker slits his throat. The Count disappears in dust. And what I'm about to tell you was the original ending of the novel, which was crossed out. Right after that moment, normally what happens is, the gypsies take off and they cradle Quincy Morris in their arms. Harker does, because he was stabbed during the fight with the gypsies to try to kill the Count. Well, the Count crumbled into dust, and there was no wooden stake used in the guy's chest. It was a Bowie knife. So there was, now there should be somewhat of an ambiguous nature to, is the Count really dead?
Right.
Had what I'm about to tell you stayed in the novel, a massive volcano erupted on the mountain that they were standing on, where the fictional castle was. Verified by Bram's notes, the lines of longitude and latitude pinpointing that location on top of that extinct volcano in northern Transylvania. Very far from Castle Dracula, but Bram moved Slane's castle all the way from Scotland. Why not move another 400 miles to a place where a detail-oriented guy like Bram Stoker is going to put his castle? He needed the castle to be on an old volcano because he planned to have a volcanic eruption. Why was that taken out? We don't know. There was no initials next to all the crossing out, showing it was either he or his editor did it. But I believe, and this is what I have written in this book, because this Dracula annotated for the 120th anniversary, which is available on Amazon for $20, tells you that I think it was his publisher that said, we need to have a very ambiguous ending to the story. If we've got a volcanic eruption, then the Count is probably really dead, and the heroes could have escaped narrowly, but we need to have this guy come back, for some sort of a sequel. Obviously, that's what I've done in my life, is found all these notes, found these openings, and written a prequel, a sequel with things that Bram has left behind. So, shameless plug to end the show. If you're interested in the ending, it's there, but also Robert 18 Basang, who is no longer living. He died about 6 months after we finished writing this thing. This was is a very well-respected Dracula scholar. This is the last thing he ever did. And he was credible to work with. He had really cool insight. We found evidence in the typescript of things that were crossed out that referenced notes in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. They gave us very good reason to believe what we know to be the first 3 chapters of Dracula, those missing 101 pages. And one of them, here it is for you listeners. One of them is the short story Dracula's Guest that you can read on bramstoker.org. It's a 17-page story that Bram's widow published 2 years after Bram died. And she said in the preface to this collection of short stories that this story, Dracula's Guest, was excised from my husband's most famous work due to length.
Oh.
Many scholars think, that's just the publisher trying to sell more books. But Robert and I found, because not only did I get the chance to look at this typescript, he did too, and we both concluded that we found 4 references to things that happened in chapter 2, Dracula's Guest, that happened throughout the story. So it was things that Harker referenced. Back in Munich, this happened, or back in the crypt in the cemetery with the wolf, this happened. Well, it had to be crossed out because it was extracted from the beginning. As did, and I'm not going to tell you guys because I've want people to have to buy the book.
Right.
Things that happen in chapter 1, we found things crossed out that line up with the notes, and the same with chapter 3, things crossed out that lined up with number 3. So that has been probably my most recent contribution to the whole Bram Stoker writing Dracula story, is that now at least Robert 18 Basang and I, it stood up pretty well since this book came out about 4 years ago, that our theories stand up, that these were within the typescript. So just to finish, Bram wrote a manuscript. That's a handwritten thing. He then hands all that to a typing service, and I've actually seen the stamps of the typing service all over that typescript. Then he has a big stack of papers. He takes it to his editor. The editor sits down and goes, now, what about that? Oh, what about this? We got to take this out. We got to take this out or add this thing in. So there's handwriting all over the thing, but all these crossouts. But now we know why. So that's my parting gift. Go check out The Seer. Go check out Dracula's Guest, all on bramstoker.org, and all my books, Dracula, the prequel to Dracula, Dracula the Undead, Stoker on Stoker, all about my lectures that I give all over the world, and then Dracula annotated for the 120th anniversary. And if you want really good Stoker wine, stokerwines.ingoodtaste.com. Treat yourself for the holiday. We've got these really cool little sampler packs with little small bottles of wine, and see what you think. But thank you, both of you, for having me on the show again, guys.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Yep. And we'll definitely have to have you back again next year after everything slows down, maybe around the same time, so we can see what you've been up to.
Yeah, I mean, next year I should have more tours to talk about, more wine stories. I got some cool things happening in Whitby and the town of Derby. Derby in England is where Dracula first appeared on stage back in 1924. They've had a 100th anniversary. Now they're up to their 101, and I go over there to give lectures. So hopefully I have some more stories for you guys. And you guys will give me some more good paranormal stories as well. So everybody take care and have a very safe Thanksgiving.
Yep. You have a great night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. That was awesome.
Yes, I love talking to him. He always has some great stories.
Yes, that was really exciting. And I am seriously going to reread the book, because it's been, I think, since high school. And when you're in high school, you're like dreading everything that you have to read. So now I need to go and read it with fresh eyes. So
definitely. So I don't know about you, but it's the day before Thanksgiving. If there's anything you wanted to talk about, if not, I'm ready to cut it short. I think some of the viewers have dropped off as well. They're all getting ready for tomorrow too. So
I'm good. I hope everybody out there, everybody watching, have a great and safe holiday. And Heather, I'll talk to you soon.
Definitely. So real quick before everybody, as always, don't forget to follow us on Facebook. Make sure you like us so that way you can catch us live every week. We are taking a break. However, we are returning December 10th to bring Todd Bates back onto the show. We had to cancel on him, so he will be back. Otherwise, we will not be returning until after the first of the year, when Reverend Sean Whittington joins us for the show. You can also catch any of our replays on Ghost Education 101. I'm not even going to mention the website, because I mention that every week and I still haven't done anything to it, but we will soon. And for those of you who haven't been watching, November 28th at 7 a.m., I will be on my way to work, but we will be making a Black Friday announcement just for our followers. So make sure you guys tune in and catch that. Anything else, Tiffany?
That's it.
No. Okay. Well, you guys all have a great night and a happy Thanksgiving. We will see you in 2 weeks.
Bye, guys.